Part 2 of SonyLIV Scam 2003, the Telgi story, is finally out after a gap of over 2 months. Did this story or our investment in it benefit from the 2-month interval? Nope, not really.
Telgi, कौन-कौन से politicians involved थे तुम्हारे साथ?
Politicians are many.
When we last saw him, Abdul Karim Telgi, played by a show-making Gagan Dev Riar, had made his first big mistake. After his staggering meteoric rise to becoming the man behind a fuzzy stamp paper empire amounting to tens of thousands of crores, with scores of policemen and politicians on his payroll, Telgi's ego got the better of him in that excellent episode 5 dance bar sequence. His arrogant public show of wealth decimated his anonymity and put a target on his back. Now the jig is up. The vultures are circling overhead. If only his fall from grace in this part 2 was as focused and compelling as his rise. There's a joke in here somewhere about how Telgi's downfall also coincides with a decline in the storytelling in this second half of the season, but I'll leave you to find it. I continue to like how accessible and watchable this series is. The basics are simple yet effective. But for me, part 2 of Scam 2003 makes the show's shortcomings all that more apparent. This 5-episode part 2 rests on a simple but intriguing conflict. Countless corrupt government officials are reliant on Telgi's hefty handouts. So embedded are his bribes to multiple hungry hands within the system that in many ways he is the system. But as the walls start closing in on him, those very corrupt officials are also scared that he'll get caught and they'll get implicated. Their greed is at odds with their fear. But the way this conflict is explored within the series is jagged, uneven, and scattered. The armada of stockbrokers, bulls, and bankers in Scam 1992, for example, were all well etched and distinctive. You knew who was who and why they were gunning for Harshad Mehta. But here the numerous ministers and officers all blur into each other. Names keep getting thrown around, but it always takes a hot second to figure out who's being referred to. The show essentially reduces them to bad politician number 1, 2, 3, and 4, along with corrupt cop number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Even watching these top dogs scrambling, scheming, and plotting behind closed doors for their own survival feels repetitive. After a point, I started to get lost in all the politicking and trying to figure out what their endgame is as things seem to go in circles. Telgi's doing scam. Some authority arrests him for it. He wriggles himself out temporarily until they close in on him again, making the ministers restart their cycle of squirming and scheming. A far more effective striking sequence comes just after Telgi is first released from a long ordeal in prison. He throws a big party for all his corrupt collaborators as we get a montage of drunken debauchery. A lawless rave of Telgi dancing next to the very politicians who spend their days publicly condemning him, and Telgi drinking alongside the police officers responsible for investigating him. Even the staging and cinematography this season feels oddly static. The narrative here doesn't feel quite as dynamic, lived in, and alive as Scam 1992. Here there's a plainness to the drama and how it's captured. It's always competent, always convincing, but rarely felt. It's the difference between being flung into the drama and merely witnessing it as a passive, detached observer. Take, for example, the various Houses of Parliament scenes in each episode where various politicians furiously debate and scream at each other about the Telgi scam as it becomes a national issue. We only ever see one corner of the Houses of Parliament, of what's supposedly a massive, chaotic, bustling room. You're always aware you're seeing a tight, fixed frame rather than a larger world. At worst, the storytelling from director Tushar Hiranandani and writers Kiran Yadnopavit and Kedar Patankar along with Karan Vyas starts to feel transparent. The charismatic scamster, the larger-than-life investigating officers, the simplification and sprinkling of masala over real-life events to make them more palatable, all backed by Karan Vyas's lyrical dialogue. What anchors Scam 2003 then is the glorious Gagan Dev Riar. Even when being thrown out of the narrative around him, Gagan refuses to let you go. Not only because of his mannerisms and the way he talks feel hauntingly familiar to the real-life Telgis as we see through real-life interview footage in the last episode, but also because of how Gagan embodies a lifetime. The journey and transformation of the warm, mild-mannered salesman born into poverty who found opportunity in loopholes within the system. How his greed and obsession with his own legend became his own undoing. Notice Gagan's walk, the arrogant way in which he struts out of prison when he arranges his own release, or the way he plays with his knuckles when calculating his next move. Small tics and mannerisms that make a performance feel alive and a person feel human. Amidst the expansive wider cast, Nandu Madhav continues to be an absolute joy to watch as the crooked cop whose self-interest is almost lovable. As is Shashank Ketkar as Telgi's voice of reason right-hand man, JK. Through various montages, Shashank is often given no more than a single look, but it's enough. The sadness in his eyes in knowing that Telgi flew too close to the sun says it all. Elsewhere, Mukesh Chhabra offers the kind of casting that makes you smile at seeing a familiar face more than be taken at how these actors are used. Whether it's Aman Verma as the Chief of Police, Nikhil Ratnaparki as Telgi's lawyer, or the sincere Mukesh Tiwari as the honest officer who makes it his mission to take Telgi down. Scam 2003 ends on something of an odd note. In its closing stretch, it chooses to focus on the personal, Telgi's wife and child, and what they've had to endure. It's ineffective because through the 10 episodes, they were largely sidelined, barring a few stray scenes. Instead, for me, the spiritual end of this show comes earlier in the final episode, when Telgi offers his sob story to the very officer that brought him down. It's an exchange that captures his fascinating mind, which oscillates between remorse and delusion, both accepting his crimes but also refusing to acknowledge the entire extent of them. Weird as it sounds, Scam 2003 left me with Kunal Khemu's iconic line from Go Goa Gone ringing in my head. What do we know and what have we learnt about the life and crimes of Abdul Karim Telgi, beyond a series of key bullet points and pressure points in his life? To be honest, I'm really not sure. You can watch Scam 2003, the Telgi story, on SonyLIV.